Okay, we are back with the first speaker of this session, Annalisa Federici, who is an associate professor of English language, translation, and linguistics at Roma 3 University. Her research interests include stylistics, critical discourse analysis, pragmatics, and translation studies. Among her latest publications are book chapters in edited collections and essays in international scholarly journals. There are many of them. And recently, she co-edited an interdisciplinary issue of Textus on spreading contaminations, interdisciplinary perspectives on health, illness, and disease. Today, she is talking about discourses of care and control, critical insights into AI-mediated communication in mental health support. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Okay. So let's start from very basic assumption. So that's a growing incorporation of artificial intelligence into medical communication is clearly reshaping patient-provider interactions, clinical decision-making, and the broader operation of healthcare systems. So using a CDA framework, in this paper I'm going to examine how mental health chatbots influence power relations, knowledge production, and communicative practices in clinical contexts. Through an analysis of AI-mediated consultations, I'm going to consider how the discourses embedded in these systems reproduce or disrupt existing hierarchies in medical communication. I hope to evaluate whether they foster patient interaction, participation, empowerment, and informed decision-making through improved health literacy. Interactions with three mental health chatbots, Seven Cups, Wiser, and Uper, will be analyzed with attention to ideological constructions of mental health, shifting power dynamics, the distribution of agency and control, and the interplay between impersonal design and personalized engagement. Investigating how these tools effectively structure responses, display empathy, and offer guidance is essential for assessing their effectiveness, especially relative to other forms of computer-mediated communication I'm particularly interested in, that is online support groups and virtual communities, especially and also about their potential in emotional and psychological support. So by interrogating the ideologies embedded in AI systems and the tensions between technocratic efficiency and patient-centered care, I hope to clarify how AI is reconfiguring expert roles while raising ethical concerns surrounding equity, transparency, and agency in healthcare communication. So this is very quickly my background. As we know, within the broader I'm really sorry, a broader field of healthcare communication studies, there's growing emphasis about the fact that technology-mediated communication should also be investigated for the way it implements functional capabilities, but also for its embedded ideologies and discursive strategies. So informed by a CDA framework, this study adopts a qualitative approach to investigate the discursive constructions within AI-mediated mental health interactions, and specifically how language used by chatbots reflects and shapes broader sociocultural values surrounding mental health and contributes to reconfiguring notions of authority, expertise, patient agency, and care. This is my data. So the primary data for this study consists of interactions with 3 AI-driven mental health chatbots, 7 Cups, Wiser, and Duper. And the platforms were selected based on their popularity, distinct operational models, and relevance to current debates about digital mental health services. To ensure comparability across platforms, I employed standardized scenarios addressing common mental health concerns such as anxiety, depression, and emotional distress. Specifically, to analyze authentic language and enable future comparisons between chatbot responses and peer-to-peer interactions in mental health groups and forums. The user inputs provided to each chatbot were modeled on typical expressions of emotional distress found in posts from the anxiety and depression support community on Reddit. And these are the scenarios drawn from Reddit, so real language, and used as input for the 3 chatbots. Then, drawing on both CDAs and previous studies on health discourse, the analysis of each interaction will focus on 4 key dimensions. The first is ideological framings of mental health, for example, asking how is mental health conceptualized and framed through the chatbot's language. Power dynamics and agency, for example, trying to inquire who is positioned as the expert and how are youth encouraged or sometimes discouraged to participate actively in their own care. Empathic communication strategies, so the linguistic devices such as affirmations, reassurances that are typically used to stimulate emotional understanding. And finally, the interplay between personalization and impersonality. So, how do the chatbots navigate, for example, the tension between delivering standardized responses and simulating personalized empathy? This is the first scenario that I showed you before, and the first conversation with 7 Cups. So as we can see in this first interaction, 7 Cups positions the user's experience within a clinical register, aligning with a medicalized discourse. The user's disclosure is recontextualized into clinical terminology, for example, by giving a definition of a panic attack, and reflecting an individualized ideology in which distress is treated as an internal psychological issue rather than one rooted in broader social and or structural conditions. Regarding power dynamics and agency, 7 Cups adopts, as we can see, a gentle, non-directive tone, but at the same time retains subtle control over the interaction by directing the conversational flow. And this is typical, as we know, of many chatbot interactions. It offers some open-ended prompts by asking, for example, how do you cope with something? What thoughts go through your mind when, etc., etc., and offer the user a degree of agency and co-construction. So trying to establish a collaborative dynamic. As far as empathic communication strategies are concerned, it employs empathic markers, but they are mostly surface level empathic markers. For example, by stating in a quite general way, it must be incredibly distressing to do something, or it sounds like you're experiencing a lot of right now. Feeling in perpetual shock must be difficult to deal with. So all these expressions simulate affective support, but at the same time remain generic and render empathy somewhat formulaic. As far as personalization versus impersonality is concerned, we can see that 7 Cups adopts a semi-personalized tone. For example, it starts with a powerful introduction, presenting itself as I'm Noni, your companion on this journey. and so constructs a persona that humanizes the chatbot, but subsequent replies, as you can see, are largely non-specific, so they are quite scripted. So it enacts relationality, but at the same time lacks capacity to engage with the user's history or with a dynamic conversational context. This is the same input, but given to Wiser. And we can see that in terms of ideological framings of mental health, Weiser does not employ diagnostic or clinical terminology, but mainly draws on cognitive and behavioral wellness discourse. And this is typical of this chatbot that is designed especially for in this way. It clearly reflects this CBT, behavioral therapy ideology, in which emotional distress is mainly framed as a matter of thought regulation instead of, I don't know, really clinical conditions. Now, in terms of power dynamics and agency, it creates a sense of agency, but at the same time, one that is tightly constrained because it just offers structured choices, inviting the user to accept exercises, select activities, or request help. So there are not many choices. A more dialogic orientation emerges only after the users asks to be listened to. Okay, so after the user clearly asks to be listened to, that was one of the predefined pathways. The chatbot answers, okay, tell me again the first thought in your mind. So stressing this cognitive behavioral model. In terms of empathic communication strategies, it starts as it is quite typical, the exchange with a warm introduction. So, for example, stating, it's great to connect with you. I'm Wise. I love sharing moments of kindness. But responses, as it frequently happens, are generalized. It maintains a polite tone, and this is out of question, but this tone is also at the same time slightly detached and scripted. In terms of personalization and impersonality, this interactional style is highly structured and goal oriented, so privileging advice and intervention. And this is typical of this chatbot, which presents a friendly and supportive persona, while at the same time reinforcing a technocratic logic that prioritizes efficiency and guidance over empathic exploration. Finally, the same scenario, but with Yupa. So here, Yupa blends clinical distancing and wellness-oriented intervention. While the chatbot acknowledges the severity of the user's symptoms, it immediately differs responsibility to a human expert. And this reflects a dual ideological stance because at the same time reaffirms the legitimacy of professional care while also supplementing it with self-help tools. Gratitude, journaling, positivity, thought exercises, and so on and so forth. Again, UPA presents itself as a supportive assistant by clearly stating, I'm here to help you, how can I support you? But avoids, again, substantive engagement with the user's emotional content. As it is typical, this chatbot steers the conversation directly towards structured interventions. Okay, for example, asking whether the user would be willing to practice gratitude journaling, which seems to be quite recurring as a strategy, but without offering the possibility of deeply exploring the distress. So it limits the potential for co-constructed meaning or dialogic engagement. As you can see, that the user is left with a binary choice, accepting or declining the chatbot offer, and so displays a constrained agency. In terms of empathic communication strategies, it clearly offers sympathy and an effectively resonant acknowledgement, But empathy again functions as a transitional device, not as the main objective or a sustained communicative posture, because effective alignment is immediately followed by referral to a professional, as we saw before, or task-oriented redirection. It adopts a minimalist and functional interface, so it lacks a chatbot persona, differently from the previous cases. It omits follow-up on specific user symptoms, and in general, we can say that it offers standardized interventions with no apparent tailoring or adaptation to the typical situation of the user. So this absence of relational cues may, of course, diminish interpersonal connection. This is the second scenario. I originally analyzed 3 or 4 scenarios, but of course, for lack of time, we just focused on 2. And again, with the first chatbot, 7 cups. Here, the chatbot conceptualizes mental health as a personal and ongoing journey, emphasizing again self-understanding and resilience rather than clinical or biomedical models. The emphasis is again on emotional experience, reflecting this non-pathologizing ideology that typically normalizes distress and encourages patient-led recovery. So the patient is continuously invited to rely on their own resources in order to overcome this difficult situation. What about power dynamics and agency? So it refrains from assuming expert authority and reflects the user's emotional state, inviting them to articulate their own needs, offers reassurance and a gentle prompt, but authority is essentially shared rather than imposed. Now, in terms of empathic communication strategies, it uses reflective mirroring, validation, and effective language, but it also paraphrases the user's distress using emotionally supportive terms and avoiding prescriptive or diagnostic discourse. The relationship is framed through a companionate identity, and this is quite effective, in my opinion. So again, repeating, I'm Noni, your companion in this journey, which clearly enhances emotional rapport. It employs first-person language and user-centered questions, yet exchange remains relatively generic and lacks memory or deeper tailoring across terms. To the same scenario, WISA reacts in this way, presenting anxiety as a natural emotional fluctuation. So rather than a real clinical condition, it reflects a normalization discourse that downplays the user's symptoms in favor of prompting self-regulation and coping. In terms of power dynamics, it just nominally grants agency through options, yet the interaction clearly remains confined within this predetermined pathway. So it reveals a system-led control over the interaction, offering just minimal adaptability. It mirrors user disclosure to repetition, apparently in order to demonstrate attentiveness, but this literal repetition is clearly felt, at least in my opinion, as procedural rather than really compassionate. It employs generic reassurance expressions that suggest scripted responses, so lacking attunement. Emotional validation is minimal and primarily instrumental, so used to move the conversation toward behavioral exercises, as seems to be the only focus of attention of this chatbot. And although it opens with a friendly greeting, the responses again feel formulaic and impersonal. Finally, in terms of ideological framings of mental health, it reflects an underlying ideology aligned with positive psychology, this is quite clear, and a solution-oriented discourse, emphasizing resilience over pathology. It positions itself as a supportive guide rather than an authority, and this is positive, clearly, creating a discursive space in which the user is encouraged to make choices. However, the user's agency is clearly maintained within bounded conversational framework. So it gently redirects the conversation from the user's emotional pain to a therapeutic exercise. So definite exerting control through subtle topic steering. It employs sympathy and an acknowledgement of emotional weight, but we have the impression that empathy functions less as an end in itself and more as a preparatory device for therapeutic redirection. Although it employs a personalized tone marked by non-repetitive responses, the lack of adaptive continuity underscores limited personalization. That is clearly one of the drawbacks of this interaction. So just to summarize very quickly and to conclude, in this paper, I have examined how 3 AI-driven mental health chatbots mediate users' experiences of psychological distress through distinct discursive and affective strategies. The comparisons highlight a series of analogies, but also differences in how each platform constructs emotional support and positions the user within the interaction. Despite these differences, all 3 chatbots draw on therapeutic tropes while remaining constrained by pre-programmed pathways and design imperatives rooted in emotional regulation. While they attempt to simulate empathic engagement, their responses frequently rely on surface level validation and scripted prompts. The ideological framings in general of these chatbots privileges individual responsibility and self-regulation, displacing systemic or relational factors. In definitive, power dynamics are asymmetrically structured, we can say, because users are rarely co-constructors of meaning or active agents in their decision making. They enable user engagement, yet constrain it through prescripted pathways. These platforms all oscillate between impersonality and superficial personalization, so incorporating emotional cues, but also exposing the limitations of AI in responding to the complexity of lived experience. So my conclusion is that these are, of course, preliminary findings, but they raise critical questions about the ethical and therapeutic viability of delegating frontline mental health support to AI systems that, while accessible and scalable, often privilege technocratic efficiency over dialogic co-construction of meaning or affective depth. This is a list of references in case you might be interested in, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
It was very interesting and clear. Okay, so sì, va bene. Okay, so our next speaker is Virginia Vecchiato. She is currently a tenure-track researcher in English language translation and linguistics at the University of Parma. Her research interests, as reflected in her publications, include legal translation, genre analysis, languages for specific purposes, and language education. Today, she's talking about healthcare capabilities in autistic young people, communication, and access challenges.
Okay.
The floor is yours.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nicole. And thank you, everybody. After listening to such outstanding presentations today, yesterday, it's like I feel I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. So I hope my presentation can build on in the inspiring work we have been listening and we have been hearing. Okay, so start with something connected to the title of my presentation. So the need to communicate effectively with patients is a defining feature of healthcare discourse, where clarity and accessibility are far more crucial than in any other specialized domains. So healthcare professionals are required not only to inform patients about their conditions, but also to introduce complex medical concepts and propose appropriate courses of treatment. So discourse and accessibility are two keywords from the title. In particular, I didn't use literacy here. In the title, I deliberately use capabilities. And here, healthcare capabilities is understood as the confidence and the ability to be effective in achieving optimal health given biologic and genetic disposition, intermediate and the broader social, political, and economic environment, and access to the public health and healthcare system. For this reason, as a concept, it is typically linked to health literacy, system navigation, patient empowerment, social and cognitive resources, and decision-making capacity. From a medical popularization and accessibility perspective, it is possible to identify some major categories that, with their specific communicative needs, could be highly relevant to increase the effectiveness of healthcare communication. And that's for this reason that I'm going to show you this picture of 9 potential, 9 ideal groups or categories of people with low health literacy, low digital literacy, migrants or refugees, linguistic minorities, people with neurodevelopmental conditions, with intellectual or global cognitive impairment, with acquired generative cognitive impairment. Yesterday we talked about, for example, patients affected by Alzheimer's disease, and people with sensory disabilities, or people with chronic and rare disease, so people affected by diabetes, and the caregivers and family members, so the so-called indirect recipients. And so each category listed here could be analyzed, interpreted, and understood through the lens of vulnerability. And each group of people, so these 9 categories, show peculiar vulnerability. And that's why this vulnerability can affect their perception of the world around them. So more specifically, cognitive and neurological vulnerability may be further subdivided into these 4 subcategories: so neurodevelopmental profiles, global intellectual impairment, acquired degenerative conditions, temporary situational cognitive impairment. So what makes autistic people distinctive from this point of view is that they do not suffer the loss of previously intact abilities or a general reduction in cognitive functioning, but rather experience differences in cognitive processing from early development. Although people with ASD often present with comorbidities such as anxiety or ADHD, autism is not a learning disability or a mental health condition. Yet it results in different communication styles, skills, and preferences to non-autistic people or neurotypical people, as they are defined. So autism often implies comorbidities, such as anxiety, as I told you before. Autism makes people behave, communicate, interact, feel, and learn in ways that are different from most other people, and prevents people from proficiently integrating the facts and rules they learn into structured knowledge and applied understanding. So that's why, considering the autism, a neurodevelopmental condition that involves this set of circumstances, let's say, physical, cognitive, emotional, we may say that just around a third of autistic people also have a learning disability. So what creates barriers in communicating with autistic people is a spatial processing style which combines with unpredictable communicative mismatch and not with lack of condition. For this reason, I'm quoting an example from a study that has been carried out by Nikolaidis and others. So this is the precise quotation. Failure to communicate in an accessible way then often led to decreased inpatient autonomy. For example, an autistic participant in the study exclaimed, "Just because I might need more information to understand things, it doesn't mean that they can or should talk to me like a child or leave me without knowledge of my own health. My body is my body, my experiences and wishes about my body are mine to take." So this aspect is central in healthcare, communication and accessibility, since it shifts the focus from simplifying to redefine communication in the light of the special needs autistic young people feel for accessible medical material. And in fact, the traditional medical popularization, which tends to assume that the transition from expert to non-expert is achieved through a strategic selection and transformation of scientific knowledge, working at various levels from terminology and lexical density to register and pragmatics, and recontextualization, as we have listened to yesterday, may result insufficient and inadequate. So this traditional approach to popularization, intended as a semiotic reorganization and certain degree of cognitive restructuring, still presupposes neurotypical inferencing, standard attention patterns, tolerance of ambiguity, and conventional text formats. So for many autistic young people, this model faced because their difficulty is not linguistic, but cognitive, pragmatic, and perceptual. So in this context, traditional popularization does not enhance accessibility. And the simpler version of a text is not always the better, as Rudolf Flesch taught us. So far from being a monolithic phenomenon, popularization and the popularization of scientific and medical contents constitutes a form of network cultural production rather than a linear transmission. And the variation of vulnerability that I try to present cannot be adequately described either in diatopic, diastratic, diaphasic terms, or through vertical variation. So it is rather a cognitive pragmatic variation, or in other terms, an accommodation-based variation, quoting Gilles and others, oriented toward communicative accessibility. So for this reason, the continuity model of scientific communication proposed by Cloyter and Shin in 1985, or the four-stage continuum presented by Angber in 2023, does not seem to be entirely applicable as a framework, because they do not include what we can call ASD-oriented popularization, a form of systematic linguistic accommodation-based variation produced by speakers in response to the perceived communicative needs of their interlocutor. So, from this point of view, what could be more functional to this unique communicative context is the introduction of a modest proposal that is a revisitation of Cloyter and Shin model, that is the integration of an intradiatypic variation as far as horizontal variation is concerned. So as we are talking about medical, the medical domain, but this intradiatypic section can be identified even in other domains. So the legal one, the financial, and so on and so forth. And so this is the intradiatypic variation. In addition, so despite the heterogeneity of the autism spectrum and the individual combination of characteristics that each autistic person presents, it is nevertheless possible to identify recurring communicative patterns that distinguish autistic and neurotypical individuals and make traditional popularization strategies only partially effective. And that's why I suggested that my proposal was the introduction of this accommodation level. Because as we said yesterday, people that are affected by this type of pathologies or chronic disease are not exactly members of the public, the lay population. So they are sort of experts. Okay, so I would locate this level between the pedagogical and the popularization levels. So what is accommodation, and a few words about this level. So the accommodation level represent should represent the need for communication models capable of accommodating cognitive and pragmatic diversity. And this observation points to the need and to take into account the principles of universal design applied originally to architecture, so by Robert Lawrence Mace, and then applied to health and scientific communication, education, and learning. That's why key assumptions of universal design learning is based on the activation of three categories of neural networks, so recognition, strategic, and affective. So universal design and autism, why? So autism-related factors which affect healthcare interactions refer to challenges related to verbal communication skills, that is the difficulty of autistic people to interpret non-literally the meaning of utterances, so for example in metaphors, idioms, jokes, irony, and sarcasm. The sensory sensitivities and overstimulation derived from loud noises, intrusive lights, and overcrowded spaces. Challenges with body awareness. Patients' need for consistency, slow proceeding speed, a typical nonverbal communication, and challenges in organization. So some accessibility tips that we can take into consideration from the National Autistic Society and Leeds Autism AIM are represented in this picture that is ADS friendly. And so light color and something that is essential, short sentences, short paragraphs, the jargon that has been avoided. And so this is a summary of some of the accessibility tips that we can borrow from these two societies that share this kind of common sense advice. In particular, in consideration of autistic people's sensory overload, too many noises and being made at the same time, bright color, and so all the aspects that I mentioned, it is important to consider that this medical text accessibility for autistic adolescents or young people involves at least 4 level or 4 dimensions. That is the linguistic one. So the linguistic dimension that is concerned concrete and controlled vocabulary that should be preferred and polysemy, figurative language, pragmatic implicature, and vague quantifiers that should be reduced. For example, instead of saying or instead of writing on a prescription, take at meals, take immediately after the first few bites at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. At the processing level, the working memory load should be reduced, avoiding cognitive scaffolding, a linear structure to follow, and by requesting one operation per item. So, for example, atomic questions should be preferred to compound questions, while chunking, sequencing, and redundancy should characterize ASD-friendly interactions. So here you have another example. Do you frequently experience discomfort? Is problematic for an autistic person. In the last 7 days, did you feel pain? Where? In your stomach? Or so just to be precise and to not infer or to not oblige the person to imply or to elaborate something on, for example, the concept of discomfort. Then the level of perceptual and sensory dimension that it is often neglected in linguistics. So that includes including spacing, font, colors, and so on and so forth. The pragmatic and interactional level. So, for example, many medical texts assume self-assessment skills, take for granted social norms and turn to emotional labeling, which may not be shared. And so a question like, how anxious do you feel in social situations, requires defining anxious, social, and situation. A question like how, by applying chunking and so by building explicitly the context of the communicative event, it is better. And so a kind of question that is preferable is, for example, when you are with other people, do you feel and provide 3, 4, so multiple choices. And then, so each level, so these 4 levels, so each level is an interface of and corresponds to a mediation, here understood as in the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, the companion volume, where mediation is intended as the focus where that is on the role of language in processes like creating the space and conditions for communicating and learning, collaborating to construct new meaning, encouraging others to construct and understand new meaning, and passing on new information in appropriate form. So effective autism-sensitive interactions evokes the principle of mediation expressed in this European document, but frequently departs from standard Gricean cooperation maxims by prioritizing explicitness and redundancy over brevity and implicature. It is not a form of random violation, but a purposeful adaptation, accommodation. In standard pragmatic interaction, speakers cooperate by following these, but in ASD-friendly interaction, especially in institutional and medical and legal contexts, these maxims are often systematically modified. So these pragmatic adjustments may be interpreted within the framework of communication accommodation theory, as I already mentioned before, which accounts for speakers' strategic adaptation of linguistic and interactional behavior in response to their interlocutors' communicative needs. So from this perspective, the deliberate expansion of informational content observed in autism-oriented interactions reflect a form of cognitive convergent accommodation. So with respect to the maximum of quantity, so just to go back to Bryce, speakers tend to provide detailed, step-by-step explanation, repeat key instructions, and render explicit meanings that are usually left implicit. Rather than constituting pragmatic inadequacy, this interactional redundancy functions as an accessibility-oriented strategy aimed at facilitating comprehension, particularly in the light of reduced pragmatic inferencing abilities. Similarly, the prioritization of the maximum manner may be understood as a form of accommodative alignment toward clarity and interpretive transparency. Interactional naturalness and stylistic economy are often subordinated to communicative reliability at the expenses of figurative language, vagueness, irony, and indirectness. Accommodation processes also affect the maximum of relation in the interactional management of relevance, which is frequently reconstructed through explicit metacommunicative practices, such as verbal signaling of topic shifts and interactional goals. So these strategies respond to differences in relevance attribution and pragmatic inference, providing orientation cues that support mutual understanding. As far as the maximum of quality, by contrast, it generally remains stable across contexts. So truthfulness, accuracy, and factual reliability continue to constitute the central kernel, so the central communicative values. So, in conclusion, we may say that taken together, these patterns indicate that pragmatic variation in autism-sensitive communication is neither random nor deficit-based, as it emerges from systematic processes of cognitive, pragmatic accommodation. Speakers actively redesign interactional norms in order to convert towards their interlocutors' processing profiles, thereby enhancing accessibility and communicative effectiveness. So this is just to show you, because I use different transparent butterflies and then a symbol, a rainbow symbol in the background. And so that's why I'm showing you the the reason why I selected those backgrounds. So the evolution of the autism terminology and symbols. So the evolution of symbols, just to echo the history of this state, okay, of this spectrum, and that I use as, is a colorful, transparent, colorful background. So thank you for your attention and the references. That's it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you, Virginia. It was really insightful. Okay, so maybe we can pull the other speaker back and see if there are questions. Okay, we have 2 questions. Even first.
Shall we? Okay.
Slightly before, so we are in time of Olympics, so it was a little bit quicker than you. Sorry about that. I have a question for Annalisa. Both presentations were very interesting, so thank you very much. Thank you very much to you as well, because your analysis of this way to communicate to people suffering from neurodiversity is very interesting, and I think should be actually a real focus for research, not only, but also for professional communication. So Annalisa, thank you very much for your insights into this kind of AI communication in a non-medical, let's put it, non-scientific environment, if I may. I worked previously on detoxing communication in social networks. And I have to say that I found a very close relationship between what I discovered, what I realized, what I analyzed, and what you showed us today. So I have to say that perhaps I don't know whether chatbots draw on this kind of social network communication. I don't know. I worked on a corpus of 10 corpus. Anyway, and so this kind of superficial, okay, let's say lack of deep emotional conversation, and this kind of relationship which is built with the interlocutor is a sort of consumer. Can I say so? So the interlocutor is seen as a consumer in detox non-scientific communication, and I see that it's very similar to this chatbot communication, because you said that there is this dialogical or dyadic way of building a relationship where emotion is verbal, but it's not real. So what is interesting is the cleft sentences that you showed us, where it says, I'm really sorry, and oh, that's okay too, it's important too, which emphasize the content of the communication. I would like to go back to these slides, but perhaps we have no time. Anyway, so my question is, do you actually, have you seen in a sort of verbal construction of the double of this reciprocal information? Because the difference is with AI that there is a continuous flow of information going from the chatbot to the user. While in social networking is different. I mean, it's much slower. So it would be also interesting, I think, in my opinion, to look at the prompting, how the interlocutor reacts to the communication, to see whether he really needs to go further into the you say support, emotional support.
Yeah, which I think is the main reason why people
they
have recourse to this kind of interactions. Emotional support.
Yes. My interest would be also to explore hedges. How this is there any kind of mitigation? Is there any kind of actual acknowledgement of the fact that they are interacting with a machine which actually does not know the real needs of the human, but is just somehow either guessing or selling a kind of communication which is the result of this kind of harnessing information, language, and so on from I don't know what. So this black box. Okay, so yeah. So did you realize in language whether there is this kind of acknowledgement, and if there is any kind of mitigation between the chatbot's input and what the receiver gets from the chatbot?
Yes, surely mitigation, but also a continuous adaptation, okay, because it's clear. The chatbot introduces itself in a certain way, acts and offers support, but then it has to comply with the user's input. So depending on what the user asks or replies, the chatbot tries to adapt the conversation, okay? But this adaptation very often ends up with, I don't know, a dead end in a certain way, because there are situations in which the conversation cannot go on. And one of the chatbots clearly acknowledges, okay, I cannot remember the exact words they use, but acknowledges, okay, I cannot help you anymore, especially if you try to be specific, okay? So the chatbot in a certain way acknowledges that its own limitations, okay? For example, I'm not so trained, okay, so far, so try to contact, for example, my team, my developers. So you are actually redirected to the team that developed it. And what you mentioned about hedges was resonance to me, because there is this tendency to yes, to use edges and to mitigate, because as you know, especially when we are in the field of mental health, which is considered to be quite sensitive as a topic, hedging is effectively used in order to avoid being over assertive or being too intrusive into other people's lives. So certainly that was something I noticed. I did not notice about cleft constructions. So thank you so much for pointing this out to me. I'll have a look. Certainly I'll have a look at it afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, then just one, if I may, just add one information. Since I'm interested in AI as well, and all communication and interaction with human versus AI, I asked my students also in a sort of surveys that interviews, surveys, and students say that they actually use the chatbot in a psychological, because of their psychological, because of their emotions, and so they need psychological support. So I've seen that this kind of chatbots is a sort of other space we go to in order to feel better, because they actually always support you. They never say, okay, no, you did something very bad.
There is also
it's very rare.
Yes,
that
they're always
but they
there
try to support you.
Yes.
So I don't know. I have big questions about this, but thank you very much.
Yes. I'm skeptical. I might say I'm skeptical in the possibility of receiving support from, okay. but what you said is interesting because there are also many studies supporting this. For example, people may feel embarrassed sometimes in sharing their own problems with professionals. Okay, so the reason why these chatbots are used is that they avoid personal engagement. Okay, so being in front of an expert, although they are experts and they are there to help us. Okay, so sharing our problems with people. So I do not share this.
Okay,
Thank you.
maybe one quick question.
Yes, no, just first of all, want to what you said earlier on, because uh, when it comes to hedging, okay, I find it quite weird for somebody, whether it is in within chatbots or whatever, because if they're saying what they feel like, for example, I don't think that there is a lot of hedging going on, because hedging has nothing to do with what somebody may say, or you know when they are kind of expressing what they feel like, for example. Okay, so if they're just expressing their own emotional feelings about a particular medical condition or whatever, I don't think that hedging has much to do with that, you know, emotional dimension of the thing. That is the first thing that I want to raise up. Then, then I've got two questions, not really questions, but clarifications, if you like. So, first one, Annalisa, well done. I think that this way of, sorry, just, yeah, this chatbot that you illustrated, I think is kind of making therapeutic decision making a lot more certain. Okay, certain. Yeah, so there is kind of more certainty going on within, you know, therapeutic aspects and decision making that are all related to therapies. So my question is whether your work is still in the pipeline or whether you plan carrying forward.
Yes, I would like to carry forward my research because in the past I analyzed, for example, interactions in mental health support groups. Okay, and the reason why I decided to take the scenarios from real support groups, the anxiety and depression support community on Reddit, was that in the future, and I don't know when exactly, but in a very near future, I would like to compare interactions between a human user and a chatbot, and interactions, of course, between people and people sharing the same conditions. So peer-to-peer interaction, actually. Okay, so this is the reason why I decided to take my scenarios. But then after selecting the inputs, I myself, okay, carried on the conversation. So yes, I would like, this is something I would like to do
Okay.
in the future. Thank you.
And yeah, and the other thing is to you, well done, all very well. But it seems to me that the continuity model that you mentioned is still applicable to communicative practices going on to the digital platform. Okay, so because when you are looking at this continuity model, I mean, in intraspecialist, interspecialist, popularized level of discourse and didactic discourse, okay, going into public communication science or medical science, what you actually find is different kinds of degrees in terms of discourses and genres. I mean, getting involved, okay, because there is variances in between. So, apart from Jan Emberg approach to gradation, I think, if my memory serves me right, to public communication. Okay, so different stages that you think mentioned on one of your slides. I think that this continuity model is still applicable to public communication of healthcare.
Yeah.
And Jan Emberg, particularly, is more like overlapping to my mind. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your question, or thank you for your observation. And in my presentation, actually, I said that it's not, it is still valid, but it's not completely adequate to support and to describe. Okay. No, because I mean, I couldn't have said that this continuity model is not valid. I mean, I couldn't have. No, so that's just no, no. Of course, that's why my proposal was modest, and it's just. No. Thank you. And so my attempt to to be destruence but also construence. So I'm saying, okay, it's not completely valid for that particular situation. So my proposal, my modest proposal could be the identification of an intermediate accommodation level, borrowing from the accommodation theory that is not by Piaget but by Gilles. So, but thank you very much.
Okay.
Very short. It's more a comment. So, but no, thank you very much. Well, I enjoyed both, of course, but I was really interested in your talk. And you began with an emphasis also on the use of lexical choices. When you talk about vulnerabilities and you talk about culpabilities. So, just a comment or a question, but do you think that it would be important also to, analyze how words that are used for, let's say, not disability or special needs, there is a big controversy, in the lexical choices and how people would like to be defined or not. So I was just wondering if you are thinking of, inserting these also in, I think it would suit it.
Yes, because that's another part, because the way people and their identity, because in the past people preferred to use and to be called by using another set of words, by saying people with autism. Nowadays they prefer autism or autistic people, or and so that's an interesting point. So exactly. Yeah, exactly. Even in the symbols that they they feel represented by is present this idea of moving back and forth. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, everyone.